ransomware attacks are particularly painful for organisations, and they are critical to organisations if they come out of the user file space and into the critical system space, because that's when you stop an organisation from working altogether. Now, we think of ransomware as mainly a malware problem, and Osirium is in the business of privileged access management and process automation and endpoint management. And we have a series of products that allow you to create barriers between user space and critical system space that stop ransomware making that jump. Now, before we get on to the way that they work, it's probably a good idea to talk about the three rough different types of ransomware that exist out there. The first type only really runs in user space, and it runs by fooling a end user into running an executable or running an executable that's part of a document, and they pick this up either through email, and actually I'm going to show you some examples here that I get on a daily basis to my personal account, or they get fooled to pull it in from a website. So some of the ones I've seen recently come from WeTransfer. Anyway, having run that program quickly gets on with the business of encrypting all of the documents that it can find in user space, and then spreads to start encrypting documents that are on all the file shares. And then after a while it pops up a message saying, all your files have been encrypted. If you want them back, you've got to pay some Bitcoin to this address. The next type of ransomware is harder. It's more complex, and it needs local admin rights to run, because it's either going to put a device driver in place, or it's going to use the local encryption that's available under Windows to encrypt your entire disk and the file systems. And the reason that this is taking more of a hold at the moment than you'd expect it to is because with all this remote working, we have far too many people running with local admin rights, and far too many people are ignoring the UAC prompt that says, do you really want to do this? And they are doing it, and thus losing their systems. But it works in the same way. It is using Windows' own encryption, obviously with a set of keys that you don't know, to encrypt all the files, and then it goes on and encrypts the files on all of the file share mappings that it can find. Now, this version doesn't trigger immediately, and there is, if you like, an arms race going on between them infecting systems and then malware systems or malware products detecting them, because the trigger time for telling the organisation that they need to pay the ransom is kind of set to be just beyond your useful backup cycle. So the idea being is that when you're told you need to pay the Bitcoin ransom, you can't go back to your backups because your backups are already infected, and your backups of your backups are already infected. And the NCSC has already made a point about this. They have said that your backups are really important, that they need to have long cycles in them, and in particular, your backup systems should be protected by using PAM products. And there is a third type of ransomware, which is probably not ransomware, it just is a nuisanceware, and it works by popping up on your screen, blocking the entire screen out and saying your files have been encrypted, you need to pay the Bitcoin, but in fact nothing's happened. All it's done is it's taken over your screen, and it's designed to fool end users, and typically the ransom is much lower, in the order of $50 or the Bitcoin equivalent of $50. So that's roughly the three categories of ransomware. And in fact, you find hybrid ransomware that goes, oh, if I can't have access to local admin rights, I'll behave this way. If I can have access to local admin rights, then I'll get the long-term lodging of the ransomware on the system. So we can see that ransomware spreads throughout the organization through infected documents and infected files. So if we have an end user that's sharing a file onto a file share, and then that file share is perhaps used by a sysadmin, and then that sysadmin has a file share to a critical system, we can see that after a while there could be a migration of ransomware onto critical systems. And once it's on the critical systems, that's when it's doing the crucial and critical damage to your organisation. Now, this is where things like PAM, PEM and our PPA product come into play. So if we start with our PAM product is basically a virtual air gap between the sysadmin's workstation and the systems that they're managing, because there's no direct connection between them. It is a credential injecting proxy, and you can elect not to have any file shares mapped across at all. Now, you can use file shares, but of course those file shares are only up during the time that you're managing. The thing about file shares is if they're open all the time, you've got that slow migration of files across the system. So you are creating a neat air gap between your system administrators and your critical systems, and it's not allowing the invisible flow of infected files across to those systems. The other way of looking at things is Privileged Endpoint Management, and getting Privileged Endpoint Management out to all those workstations that were in the office that have found their way into people's homes for remote working, because then you're controlling what they're actually putting on that machine. Because one of the problems is once that machine's out of your way, you don't see what it gets used for. You hope that it gets used for work, but it could get used for a pile of other things, and it could have extended working hours. With PEM, you're controlling which executables can run using local admin rights. And if it's not on the list, it doesn't get run, and that means it can't do that long-term lodging of ransomware on those machines. And of course, after this pandemic's finished, those machines are going to come back into the office, and they might not be on a share on a VPN, they might be directly on those shares. And that's really important. PPA, which is Osirium Automation, which is a privileged process automation product, allows you just to delegate the task, not the privilege, or delegate the process and not the privilege. And in this way, there is no direct SSH, RDP or any other protocol login to the machine. What happens is that the PPA appliance runs the process on behalf of the user and returns the results back to the user. So it's almost like a double virtual air gap between the two machines, and that's creating a real degree of isolation. So, in summary, what we've talked about is that ransomware is moving between machines using files. It uses a lot of social engineering to get people to run them in the first place. It has long delays between the infection and the triggering, obviously depending on the type of ransomware that it is. And that Osirium has a range of products that create a barrier to these things even running in the first place, or to these files getting their way onto critical systems. And if you've been thinking about installing Privileged Access Management and it's on your list, because it's acting as a barrier to the movement of ransomware, I would hope that it's going to move up your list of importance and something that you want to get done in 2021. Anyway, if you've enjoyed listening to all this and you want to find out more about Osirium products, then double please get in touch. Thank you.